And then for the last one, that was I Wake Up in the Night When I Dream in Black and White. It's all original text, but it's also the first time I put it as text and not something that's going to be singing, because it has the element of the spoken word, so it's more exposed in a way. So it felt like I was trying to find all these different ways in which text could come out with music, or work together with music, or work on its own and then come the music. And it was a whole different process to what I've been used to, and it feels like something that somehow I owed to myself, to open that window and give myself the opportunity to work with text, whether it is as lyrics or spoken word, or, as you say, take something that I love and talk about it and reflect around it.
This is Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast from Loose Leaf Transmissions. Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the podcast. If you are new here, it's great to have you along. My name is Tyler, and I'm a composer, broadcaster, curator, producer. Do a lot of different things, but at the heart of it all, I just love making things. And on this show, I sit down with other creative folks to talk about their process, philosophy, and everything that shapes who they are as artists and why they make what they make. And if you have been listening for a while, welcome back. I always appreciate you being here. On this episode of Music Maker, I'm joined by composer and producer Caterina Schembri. Caterina is an Italian-Colombian composer and producer based in Dublin, Ireland. Her music explores harmonic color, literary and symbolic references, multidisciplinary intersections, and often integrates original text written by herself. She recently released her debut album, Sea Salt Turpentine, on the Ergodos label, and her works have been commissioned and performed by Ficino Ensemble, Chamber Choir Ireland, and many others. She is also a founding member of Sonic Gate Studios and serves as the general manager of Ergodos. In this conversation, Caterina reflects on her unusual journey into composition, starting music later in life and navigating a path through both rigid academic systems and the pressures of commercial scoring. We talk about her deep connection to literature and text, how symbolism and visual imagery inform her music, and how introspection, time, and space are central to both her artistic philosophy and her personal creative identity. It's a really fantastic conversation, and I can't wait to share it with you. Let's get into it in just a moment. This show grows because of people like you, not some algorithm. So if something in today's conversation sparks something for you, the best way to support it is to follow the podcast and to share it with someone who'd get it too. You'll find links to subscribe, follow us on Instagram, or support on Patreon, all in the show notes or at looseleaftransmissions.com. Now, on to my conversation with Caterina Schembri. Well, Caterina, it's so great, first of all, to meet you. This is the first time we've gotten a chance to speak, but we were talking just a moment ago before we started recording that I learned about your music through your newest album, and I just fell in love with your music, and I knew that you were somebody that I had to talk to because your music really resonates with me. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm just really excited to get into this today.
Thanks so much for having me, Tyler. Delighted to be here.
So, where we like to start on Music Maker is kind of as far back as you're willing to share, or as far back as you can remember. Kind of trace the threads back of your artistic journey. So, I'm wondering, what is your earliest artistic memory as a composer?
Yeah, that one's interesting. I think, unlike loads of people that ended up working as musicians for let's say as a career, I started rather late in life. I would have been 14 or 15 when I first started to get into music altogether. Really, by then I wouldn't play any instrument or anything. I would have had a very, let's say, basic music education at school. And so around that time, even though I would have had loads of, let's say, creative curiosities on the first part of my life, they weren't necessarily music related. I was a lot into literature and books from very early on. I started painting when I was a bit older, was doing like whole thing of like, yeah, creative exploration. And then at some point I decided it was going to be music. And it's funny because I don't necessarily remember what triggered it. I just remember that I was just thirsty in general for, creative output. And then around 14, 15, I decided I think it's music. I think I need to try music just because I enjoyed it so much. And so I remember having this chat with my dad, who's always been a general supporter of everything I do, and telling him, I think I want to be a composer. I think that's what I really want to do. And he was just so good about it. I remember he just looked at me just in this way of like, is she being serious? And the moment she realized I was being serious, he just took me on my word, and he was like, okay, so what do we need to do to make this happen? And after that, the whole thing was just kind of was full speed ahead. I went to music school. I started to learn the piano, guitar a little bit, but mostly piano. I really loved, and from the get go, I was composing. I was already kind of with that in mind that I wanted to be a composer, not a performer. So that would have been the first time it kind of happened, and then from then onwards, it's just been go go go. I don't think I ever second guessed myself on that one.
So you were not playing any instruments, and you
Not
kind of
at
just
all.
decided
Yeah.
like, okay, I want to be a like how does that work? I know of like a few people that are like that, but that's so fascinating to me. I mean, what kind of prompted you to like get that, I guess, epiphany, like, oh, I want to compose?
I think I specifically remember I was very touched and very impacted by the music of Claude Debussy, all the piano stuff in particular. And I think I've always been, and I was telling you, I had a bit like of a moment with painting as well. And I think colors, I've always been very sensitive to that. And there was something in the way he did it that just it was surreal for me. Like I couldn't understand how he managed to make that just on a piano. And that's probably one of the things that kind of triggered me to I need to figure out how you get this done. And you know how at that age you're just like kind of just brave by nature or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of
something.
course.
So I just went for it, and I'm really happy I did. Yeah, it's been good since.
What were those first kind of efforts into composition like? Because because I was playing music by the time I started composing, though I was about the same age, that like 14, 15, when I first started seriously composing. But I was like used to reading music. I had taken like a little bit of piano lessons. I was playing in like the school band. I mean, what were those first compositions like for you as someone who I imagine maybe had never read sheet music
Yeah, yeah.
before?
So I think loads of it was. I just remember being very, very captured by the whole thing, and so I wanted to learn everything at the same time. And music theory, which I know loads of people are a little bit distance from, was actually something I loved because like it was all the tools to understand this thing I really wanted to understand. So music theory was a starting point, a very important one, of course. And then loads of it was between that and the kind of music I was hearing. And again, everything mostly probably piano based and piano related at first. So I was listening to a lot of piano music. I was starting to play it. And at the same time, I was starting to kind of compose for it. And it seemed like the most straightforward way to get into it,
Mm.
to understand all this kind of universe, that little by little I was starting to dissect. And I think part of that is still with me even nowadays. Like I tend to start in the piano usually, and I'm not a great pianist actually, but I feel so at home there. And I think loads of my thinking whenever I start writing tends to be harmony first. I think a lot about harmony, and harmony is such an important tool for my music making, that probably comes from there, from that kind of sense of understanding all the parts and how they would come together.
Well, and to me, like you were talking about painting, and of course, Claude Debussy's music is so, I mean,
Mm,
impressionistic, of course,
yeah,
is the way we describe it. But there is like so much color to it, both instrumentally and harmonically. So, I mean, like, no surprise, like you gravitate towards harmony,
that's
with
it.
all that in mind. When was your first encounter with a composer? Because, I mean, it sounds like you were starting late, but you did end up going to school for composition. Is that right?
Yes, I did. And it all happened very quickly. I remember like all my high school years were rather intense because I was doing my normal school by day, then the music school by night, and I was just kind of spending all these hours trying to get ready for admission exams in the, to get into music school when I graduated and all of that. And so it was my first encounter with a composer as living composer, you mean?
Yeah, well, that's my intention with this question, but
Yeah.
other people have answered it like their first encounter with a living composer's music. So feel free,
Okay.
either or.
My first encounter with a living composer would have been my back in the day teacher, who was also young enough, like he would have been like doing his undergrad when he started teaching me, and he was sort of my harmony teacher, but also guitar teacher and composition. So it was all of that together, and I think just that kind of sense of the figure of the composer that wasn't someone that necessarily carried loads of years and loads of
Yeah,
authority was a really good first approach. Something that felt maybe closer to home or something that I could
right.
be without having to, put all that big labels on what a composer is. And I think classical music and music in general has a lot of that. And so I'm really glad that my first approach to the figure of a composer was someone that felt very approachable, very friendly.
So you're based in Dublin, Ireland.
Yes.
Is all of this happening in Ireland, or is it happening somewhere else?
No, this all happened in Bogota.
Ah,
I'm originally, I was born in Colombia. I'm half Colombian, half Italian. And up until my 20s, I was living in Bogota. Yes, so all of this would have been in Bogota.
and your university studies also there in
Undergrad,
Bogota?
yes.
Yeah. That's also fascinating to me. So, I guess with that in mind, can you share a little bit of an overview of your journey, of your creative journey, connect the dots, so to speak? I know there's a lot to cover, I'm sure, from that point to today, but I mean, do you feel like you followed a more conventional path, whatever that might mean to you, or do you feel like it was kind of with some unexpected twists?
I think there's always points, and it feels, and this is probably different from everyone, but I think there's a couple of moments in which I purposely decided to steer away from something and into something else. And I think, as I was saying, when I first started, it was all very driven, very disciplined into that particular outcome of I want to make this happen. How do I make it happen? And what are the steps to follow? After that, I went to do my undergrad in Bogota, and would have been, or what is like the big music school there for composition, which is the Javeriana University. And they have a really nice program in composition. It's long. It's about 5 years,
Wow.
and it's very heavy in theory, and it's famously difficult. It would have been like the kind of place that you get very few people actually finishing the program from the intake. And so I went there, and it was 5 years of working really hard in getting my best out of all the, let's say, technical skills that you learn as a composer. It was very heavy in harmony, again very heavy in theory in general, chamber writing, loads of chamber writing. That's kind of the curriculum they have in there. But it also was the type of place that you would still see in many places nowadays. It's quite dogmatic, let's say.
Ah,
And they were driving me for a certain specific aesthetic that was not necessarily what I was looking for or what I liked. There was this whole idea of excess of complexity, for example, of dislike for consonants, dislike for melody, dislike for many things that I probably feel are quite natural to my music. And so after I finished there, which was a place that was very good for, getting technical skills, I was a little bit fed up with
yeah,
how
I
the
can imagine.
dogma and the academia worked. And so I decided I wanted to try for music for film. And so I did my master's in music for film, and that was here in Ireland. And again, it was amazing. It just like, it was a very intense year, and such a turning point for me personally and creatively, I think, because not only it gave me loads of new aesthetics and new tools and new whole set of things, but also loads of very interesting people. And what was really nice there is that it was an international master, so I had people from everywhere and from very different backgrounds. It would have been completely different to what I was used to in my undergrad, because like you have people coming from jazz or from more folk traditional stuff or even from pop, and like all these other things that were kind of coming together in the melting pot, and that was really cool. It also opened up my eyes to some other things that were very important from a technical side, in terms of, for example, technology, how to deal with maybe more electronic elements, how to mix, how to understand sound, how do you record it. It was also very focused on orchestral writing, and so it was a real boot camp in working for the orchestra and
Mm.
orchestration. And so I learned so many things for that master in film, and I think it was really nice that I got, let's say, the two ends of the spectrum in a way, because then after I finished the masters, I also slowly, after I graduated, started noticing that also film wasn't giving me necessarily what I wanted. Like I don't really necessarily feel super comfortable working to fulfill specific things, like they need to, like certain genres need certain things, and it feels very prescriptive, and somehow like it cuts creativity. And then it's also responding to some other pressures. It's not responding to academia anymore, but it's responding to market and what is likable, and like all these things. So it was really the two ends of the spectrum. And so again, steering back away from that and finally finding what was my middle ground, and which is doing my own music but my own way. So I think I was lucky to have the two sides of it on my formation, but then also lucky to have decided at some point that I was going to, try to find my own space, and not following something specific on either of those two sides.
Yeah, I totally feel what you're talking about. I mean, especially with like, I would say that I got very lucky with my master's as well, but I was kind of coming from like a sort of autodidactic, self taught sort of space as a composer into that more rigid academic, but still with some flexibility and like room for my own voice. But a lot of my problems with academia in the United States is exactly what you're describing in Colombia, in that, there I remember having conversations with friends in my masters who were like, you can't, like, we shouldn't program, like, we're like programming for like a new music concert at school, right? And they're like, we shouldn't pick any pieces with where you can feel like a rigid eighth note. Like it needs to be like super complex, or like that
Yeah,
harmony's too simple, and like
yeah.
that sort of thing. And I was kind of buying into that at the time, but the more older I get, I guess the more separated I get from that experience, and also just the breadth of contemporary music that exists. Like the more you become aware of that, it's like, yeah, let's have some eighth notes. Let's have some, triadic harmony, and like, why not? And I think as a composer now, my goal is like, how do I meld all these ways in a way that resonates with people? And I can hear that in your music too. There's like a certain sort of cinematic quality, but it's not like movie music, which I
Exactly.
appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, for me at least, like all of that seem like almost more important than the actual space of the institution. Like it is important, the institution is so important, learning all those things is so important, but kind of walking away from them or kind of finding your own way towards it is interesting. And I think, like, one thing is whatever happens in school, but real life is full of it as well. Like you're always surrounded by those two pressure points, I
Oh
guess,
yeah.
like impressing people in, that are
Yeah.
musicians, or impressing the audiences, and where do you stand there, and how to, take a little bit of distance from it, and decide that yeah, you just do what you do, which is one of the very nice things I found here in Ireland, and one of the reasons I decided to stay. That I feel there's a general sense of open-mindedness in music. Like I see loads of people here come from backgrounds that are very different or kind of mix things, that maybe a bit of trad music with something that's very kind of high baroque or classical, and like it works really well. If anything, it gives more personality to the whole thing.
We were talking beforehand about like my list of like you were on my list of composers to reach out to, and I have so many Irish composers that
Very good.
I've become friends with, but also because like I just feel like there's something in Ireland that's just like, man, just so many great composers and so much great music being made that, oh, maybe I should move there too.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting space. Like I haven't seen how it works in many other places, but you get the sense, when you meet people and you hear how it goes. And I think it's rare. I think it's rare to find somewhere that feels, that open minded.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned like when you decided you wanted to compose at the age of 14 or 15, but was there a moment kind of like later on in a more professional setting or even in an academic setting where it kind of crystallized like, okay, yes, I want to pursue composition as a career? Did that happen, or have you just never had to worry or think about it?
Well, I think that was like from that point onwards, every decision I made was kind of gearing me towards that. So when I made that decision, then it was, of course, like, okay, the moment you get into your undergrad and decide to, like, okay, I'm officially studying composition. And then after that, you're doing the master's, which is also composition. And after that, I guess, I guess there's always a point in which you kind of finally have your first moment outside of an academic frame, which in my case I can think very specifically about what would have been my kind of first commission here in Ireland. That also felt like the first time I was presenting work professionally as a composer, and this was I want to say 2022, although it could have been 2021. One of those, for a beautiful, beautiful concert that Ergodos organized, and they commissioned me to write a piece for vocal ensemble that had this beautiful concert that was all about ritual and remembrance and memory, and that was the first time that I had something that felt like, okay, I'm a professional composer.
Yeah, that those moments are important,
Yeah.
and I don't know, like it kind of surprises me to hear that that was only just a few years ago, kind of like in the post-pandemic haze, I guess.
I think so. Like I'd say, like before that, it all feels like I was searching still, and that really felt like I can, if I can pinpoint a moment that I felt like, okay, this is my voice and this is out there and this feels like me. It's probably that one. Yeah.
If you really want to stay connected to what I'm building here, the best way isn't social media, actually. It's the newsletter. That's where I share new episodes, unfiltered thoughts about the creative process, ways to support the work, and whatever's coming next. You can sign up at looseleaftransmissions.com or through the link in the show notes. Well, I'm so glad that you mentioned like this idea of searching or searching and finding who you are as a composer, because it's like the
Yeah.
perfect segue into like getting into the weeds here about you and your work and your process. So I'd like to kind of start with something that you touched on just a little bit earlier, and that was like an interest in literature that you had from a young age. And so much of your music now draws on literature. You often write your own text when there's vocal music. I also feel like you have music that is like inspired by literature in a way that's like it's not about the writing, it's like about your feeling about the writing, which I also
Mm.
love. And so when did the written word become like an integral part of your creative voice?
That's an interesting one, because there's always this sense to me, at least, that like that was kind of my first love. Literature was my first love, as I can remember from a very, very young age, just being crazy about books and about reading, and I really loved it. And I for many years I thought that was going to be it, that was going to be my creative pursuit, and that was going to be my life. And then music came into the picture, and I always stayed for the love of reading, with the love of reading and with the love of books. somehow I kind of assume or settle with the idea that that was it. That's what it was going to be for me, like I was just going to be, let's say, a spectator in terms of what literature was. And then at some point, as part of that search that you're talking about, one of the things that I think that really helped me click in finding who I wanted to be as a composer is coming back to it and decided that why not? I'm just going to give this a go. And I think it's one of those things that it's probably been under the surface for so many years that I was kind of fighting to get out at some
Yeah.
point. And so when it did, it was such a powerful tool in a way, because like I could immediately feel the two of them coming together and how one thing informed the other, and it was so important to my process and to the outcome. And like the entire album actually came out from that particular desire of bringing literature into the mix and bringing text into the mix. And like I approached it kind of little by little. Like there's a lot of it that you can probably see it in the way the album is shaped as well. There's moments in which like I'm starting to get a grasp of it. And so for example, I start with text that already exists, and then from there I start working on my own text. And then there's for example, that's for There Is a Willow, which was the first one I wrote out of that set, in which I was like, okay, I'm going to start with something that I know and then see where that takes me. And then I get bit more daring and say, okay, I'm just going to go for something that's completely my own, which is Sea Salt and Turpentine. And that's complete original text. And it felt so good to have it
Yeah.
there from beginning to the end. And it took me a long time. But it was such a powerful moment in terms of creative process to me. And then for the last one, that was I Wake Up in the Night When I Dream in Black and White. It's all original text, but it's also the first time I put it as text and not something that's going to be singing, because it has the element of the spoken word, so it's more exposed in a way. So it felt like I was trying to find all these different ways in which text could come out with music, or work together with music, or work on its own and then come the music. And it was a whole different process to what I've been used to, and it feels like something that somehow I owed to myself to open that window and give myself the opportunity to work with text, whether it is as lyrics or spoken word, or as you say, take something that I love and talk about it and reflect around it.
What draws you to writing your own text as opposed to setting someone else's words? I mean, text writing seems like such a scary thing to me personally. And you mentioned like it taking a long time to get it right for the one piece, Sea Salt and Turpentine. I mean, I'm sure that you could talk a lot about this.
Again, the curiosity of working with text was there. And then I think the times, because I've done this before as well, working with set text is such a different experience, right? Because there's a lot that the text is already given you in terms of rhythm, in terms of structure, in terms of like shape. There's so many things that are there already. Meaning, of course, like, like you're working around something that's already been done, it's already been said. And what I really love about working with original text, and like the first moment I did it, like after that, it just became like this thing that it came to me easily, is the fact that you have control over everything, right? Because like if
Yeah.
there's maybe a word or it's something in terms of the form or the shape or the amount of text you need or how you want to fit it, that it's almost like it works in tandem, at least for me. Like it's very rarely do I just like sit down and write the text first fully and then put the music into it
Yeah.
the same way you would do when you have set text, right? It's usually a very open dialogue. And it's something that, okay, maybe I do a draft of the text and then I start setting the music and then I come back to it. Or maybe I start working on like a melodic idea and the text comes attached to it. And, it's such a different interplay, so to say, that to me it's almost as if it's like a completely different form of composition than it would be working with set text. Yeah.
Oh, it's so fascinating to me because I haven't written a lot of vocal music, but something you said about like with text, like it gives you so much. One of the only vocal pieces that I've written, I did in grad school, and it was setting text by Walt Whitman, and it's like what's the collection called? Leaves of Grass, I think, or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like near the end of his life, and he's like sitting under a tree, and it's like an autumnal day or something, and he's like describing like the weather and the and nature around him, basically, and I went to set it, and my teacher in grad school was like, you don't have to like create music from the text as it goes. You can like look later in the poem or the
Yeah.
story, and you can like set that to music from the start. And that was like such a revelation to me, like, oh, he's right. Like I can like setting the text isn't just like putting words to melody. It's like creating an atmosphere, and you can do that through time in a way that like words almost fall short, I think.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'd love to dig a little bit more into this, because I think like when we talk about, okay, putting words to music, that's like a very um easy thing to understand, I think, for most people. But besides that, what other ways do you like work with the written word, and how does that like influence the narrative of your music, the textures that you use, the harmony, all that kind of stuff?
I think it's interesting even what you're mentioning. And I'd say most of us, when we first approach this kind of big name poets or even like a work we really like, it feels in a way intrusive, right? If you're touching, I don't know, Whitman or Keats or Shakespeare or like, and these are things that feel in a way kind of sacred, and you don't want to break them. You don't want to do something wrong to them. And I think that's one of the first things that for me was very important to, and maybe the way you perceive it is really good, that you perceive the way that I do it is like, okay, I'm not doing this author, I'm doing my spin or my version
Mm,
on this author or whatever this author makes me think or feel. It's interesting because I know loads of it comes from taking, in a way, charge over it, like, okay, this is someone else did it, but this is my version of it, this is me now. And I found, like, for many pieces, I just finished one there that I was doing for chamber choir Ireland on a John Keats poem, and I've loved John Keats from very early on, and he's such a fantastic writer. It's a really long beautiful poem, but like I couldn't possibly do the whole thing. Like I
yeah.
couldn't possibly, make it into music. So what I decided is like, what do I want from this? And if you didn't necessarily know it, there's many things of it that you probably wouldn't recognize because I just ended up just pick and choosing bits, words that I liked, verses that I liked that maybe I would repeat incessantly and like that sort of thing. And like what is it about that particular poem that I'm interested in and what makes it my own. So I think that's a way to do it. And I think because we're all so sensitive as musicians to things like rhythm and phonetics, I feel like loads of it inform my decisions as well whenever I'm working with text. So of course meaning is massive, but phonetics and rhythm are very important. And sometimes you'd find yourself choosing, when I'm doing original stuff, one word over the other because it's two syllables instead of three,
Yeah.
or because it has a certain vowel that has a sound that works better in that melodic shape that you're imagining. Or, like there's all these sort of things that come into play. And sometimes they're mostly intuitive, to be honest.
I mean, this seems like the perfect place to talk about symbolism, which is another facet of your work. Literary symbolism, visual symbolism, or otherwise. I mean, how does that tend to manifest in your music? How do you work with symbolism?
One of the things, again, of working with text is that the amount of layers that you can have in it, right? And one thing is like the meaning of the word, but another thing is like the many meanings that word can have. One of the first pieces I approached, I was telling you about this, but even before, like I trace it back, like it's funny how all these things kind of start revealing themselves of like, oh, this is something important to me because like I keep coming back to it. And then at some point, like you realize it's something and you can pinpoint it. But then you look back and it's like, I kind of had done this already before.
Right.
But with that Shakespeare, I was doing for the second piece of the album is called There Is a Willow, and it's based on the scene in Hamlet in which Ophelia dies, which was again another very impactful moment in literature for me. And I think especially that idea of this tormentous young love. And I think around that time in life I would have had like a couple of people that were very close to me that were going through relationships that felt a little bit toxic and that felt a little bit like, why do, and I started to think a lot about that, about like how women get caught up in these situations, and how all of that, whenever, since you're very young, you get this idea of love and how it kind of
Right.
breaks you a little bit and how you kind of start making sense of it. So that particular scene in Hamlet feels so powerful to me. It always did, and it's interesting because like she's never the point of focus in the play, right? But I think she's the most interesting character, and so relevant and so universal because I think we all go through that. And anyways, I got into the scene, into that particular moment, and I started reading more and more about it. And there's this super interesting thing I didn't know existed, or didn't know existed that clearly, which is floriography. And floriography was a thing that became very famous in the Victorian age with the pre-Raphaelites, but kind of roots from Shakespeare, which is the idea that flowers had specific meanings, right? And there's like whole books. I have like a couple of books with all this, almost like encyclopedia with all the plants and what they would mean if there was in this color or that color. And like people would always use it to even send coded messages or something, meaning something. And that particular passage in the Hamlet is full of that. They
Wow.
make a
Yeah.
big description of her drowning in the river and like all the flowers she sees. And all the flowers she sees are a full collection, like this full bouquet of what the character is. So loads of it is charged with like the idea of innocence, with the idea of purity. And then they start kind of darkening the thing, you know, tragic love of like something that's toxic, etc. So I thought this was perfect thing to use whenever I start drawing into my own version of the text. So I start with the original scene and then I start working into it, and that's kind of structural thing in that particular piece. All the different flowers I use and I mention have a specific meaning, specific given meaning, and they're almost like triggers in the form of the music. And for example, I get into a point kind of towards the last bit of the piece in which I talk about wolfsbane blue. It doesn't make a reference of her drowning in wolfsbane blue, and wolfsbane blue is one of the darker flowers in this books of floriography. Is the wolfsbane because it's poison, is aconite, is something toxic, and that's about the point in which like the piece is about to end, and it gets to its darker moment, but also like in terms of like, because this is sort of piece that kind of has a flow and is moving through and you kind of feels regular, even though
Yeah.
it's kind of irregular meter, but it feels comfortable. And then when I start getting into darker colors, I start kind of shifting that in terms of rhythm. That'd be an example, for example, of something that has a meaning to me that might be just the name of a flower if you just hear the lyrics, but that has something behind it. And through that particular album, but also in that piece I was talking about earlier, I wrote for the vocal ensemble, and another piano piece I wrote recently, meaning of flowers and plants actually has been a thing that I keep coming to, because there's like so kind of ancient knowledge in these things that is never just a tree, is never just a flower. There's so much behind them, and so whenever I pick them, there's always something. There's always a reason why I picked that particular tree for the title of a piece, or I chose to talk about cypress green, for example, in Sea Salt and Turpentine, and not any other type of green, and like all those things.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I mean, you kind of answered this question that popped into my mind, but I mean, I'd love to talk more about it if you're up for it. This idea of the symbolism and the meaning leading to certain musical decisions that you make. I mean, the Wolfsbane is such a beautiful example of a darkening of things getting darker in the music. But of course, darker is like totally subjective. So I mean, like, how do you land on certain harmony, for example, based on symbolism or rhythm, even?
That's tricky. I guess, and like as you're saying, it could be very different for many different people. But I guess when you're composing, you just think about whatever darker it means to you, or lighter it means to you, or brighter. I never really know how I make these decisions. Like they like, okay, you obviously think about them, and like but there's a part of it being intuitive, like again probably
Sure.
me sitting in the piano and being like, oh, what could work here, what could bring me there. Usually I have a sense of the result, if that makes sense. Like I imagine how it should sound, or how it should feel, and then my work is try to figure out how to get there, if that makes sense. So if I know, for example, the particular curve for that piece was that it was going to start, let's say, more idyllic or brighter, and then start darkening and feeling a little bit more uncomfortable, if you want, or it has that sense of dying out, or like losing edges, when you kind of, I always thought of the idea, that beautiful beautiful painting, the this is again one of the pre-Raphael lights. I don't remember which of them, of Ophelia drowning in the river, with all the flowers, and that idea visually of when you see from above something that's drowning, it starts to lose clarity.
Mm, yeah.
So I think that was the visual that I had in my head, for example, for that thing in particular, something that felt that had clear edges but started losing clarity as it dropped. That's a very clear visual. And how do I respond to that musically? And so then I start digging and figuring out how to do it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know if that makes sense, but yeah,
No, no, no,
I
no.
think like my yeah, I think that loads of my compositional process actually has that kind of envisioning, if that makes sense, of like how do I think this should feel when someone's listening to it, or when I'm listening to it, and how do I achieve that.
It does make sense, and I realize now, like, that's a tough question for composers. I mean, like, there's a lot of mystery to what we do. I think even to us, it's like, and
Yeah.
you're right, and a lot of times it does come down to intuition, especially when we're interpreting, something that's extra musical, like literature or art or something like that. And but I do also have to say I love the idea of like a softening of edges, or maybe this is something that I've noticed that you do that I also do, is just like 35 millimeter photography.
Yes.
And I'm drawn to it. I mean, a lot of composers do this.
Completely. Yeah.
I've talked about it with a lot of people on this podcast. Actually, it's like a new music thing, I guess. I
It's
don't
a
know,
probably.
but like so much of like aperture and focus and
Hmm.
the results of like analog photography has like ended up informing my own musical thoughts and thinking. So I don't know, I think.
Yeah, no, completely. Because these are concepts that are very, very clear, I guess, and like it's interesting to explore those. Like in my case, that would have been there totally. The idea of something coming in and out of focus is something that
Yeah.
I find I keep coming back to, or the idea of slow transformations, for example, like things like that feel more kind of, I don't know if conceptual is the right way to be, but like something clear that you're trying to achieve, rather than just kind of walking blindly.
So this is a question that I ask everybody, and I feel like every time I get to this question, everyone's already kind of answered it. But I'll
Okay.
I'll ask you in a more direct way. What would you describe as the primary pillars of your creative practice? So this could be, philosophically, stylistically, aesthetically, um, anything like that that forms the foundation of your work.
Okay, that's hard. I think I think one of the things I focus the most on comes back to what I was talking about when we were talking about the journey and the searching, which is the idea of writing music that feels authentic and that feels genuine and that feels like myself, if that makes any sense. So that's one of the things that I kind of always keep in mind and try to, because there's so much noise outside whenever you're writing, and there's so many things that get into your head. So one of the most important things for me is that to be able to kind of shut all that noise and decide that whatever I'm doing is something that feels truthful, genuine, authentic, and that I'm pursuing something that I want to be pursuing. So I think that's one of the most important things. There's always the sense of, and I know many of us think about this way, of what the music needs or what the piece needs, and kind of give yourself the time to discover what's the actual soul of it, if you want to like see it that way. And sometimes it takes time, and sometimes it's not necessarily a straightforward process, or something that can be quantified or something. Sometimes you just need the time to get there mentally to understand what the music needs. And it's one of the nicest things about composing as well, right? That idea of unveiling or unearthing something, and at what point something that you started feels like something almost autonomous, that is not
Yeah,
necessarily you anymore. Like, it's still your thing, but it's a thing on its own, which I think it's such an interesting moment in creative practice.
that's one of my favorite things that happens with what we do it's weird. It's not like every piece I feel this way, but like some pieces, and I think in the hands of the right performers especially, it's like, you finish a piece, and then depending on, the breadth of that music, it could be months or even like a year or more before you hear it realized in real life. And sometimes that happens and I'm like, okay, yeah, like that's my piece. And sometimes it happens and it's like, did I really do this? Like, and I think that's such a fascinating
Yeah,
phenomenon, I guess.
completely.
And I'm so glad that you touched on it because it's, yeah, it's something that I've never really talked about with anyone.
But certainly there, like, even things like, well, because you change so much through the years, but maybe you look back, even like, if I'd be looking back 15 years ago to when I was starting, I know there's a few of those piano pieces that were just exploratory, that even if
Yeah,
I listen to right now, I'd be like, there is something there. There
yeah,
is something there that was like, that one in particular, I was connecting with. That one in particular had something important, or I found out something important in that particular piece. And they're kind of dotted through the years, but you know which are the ones that really made it. You're like, okay, yeah.
for sure. So before we started our chat, you mentioned to me that introspective or quiet or slow music really resonates with your
Yeah.
personality. How do you see that connection showing up in your music?
Um, I'd say for sure the sort of music I write is music that requires certain attention and certain mindset from whoever's listening. And I think that's something I find important in the kind of music I listen to as well. Like, there's very different types of listening, very different types of music. But one of the things I enjoy the most, and this again came as a kind of later discovery in life, is that idea of fighting back maybe the need for complexity, or the need
Yeah,
for many things happening, or the need for something that's accelerating or catchy or rapid, or like, all these things, especially in the world we live in today, that I feel is so hectic. And we're used to like things happening quickly and things catching attention very quickly, and uh low span attention culture, you know that I find such comfort and such joy in the opposite. And loads of kind of my big heroes in music would be probably along those lines. Like I love the music of Arvo Pärt, for example. He was a really important composer for me. And I feel loads of the music that surrounds me and that I decided I wanted to write look for that space of introspection, for that space of looking into something rather than, you know, making or the speed and the that sort of thing. So that becomes almost something, as you were saying earlier, almost philosophical in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah.
That idea of finding introspection and breath in music and space and time and consciousness of time and space, I guess, which is maybe unusual nowadays in kind of everyday life.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I want to be careful here because I feel like we could start talking for hours about this.
Yeah.
That's how strongly I feel about what you're describing, and in my own work and in the music that I experience. And I'll go as far to say as I feel annoyed sometimes with some of the like more popular contemporary composition pieces, contemporary classical pieces,
Yeah,
and that
okay.
I find myself listening. It does. I mean, it's either like student pieces that are trying to emulate like what's trendy, or
Mm,
like pieces by established composers that follow these trends that are like, I get to the end of the piece and I realize like there's never been like a space in it. It's just like a wall of sound.
that's it. Or just like this showcase of virtuosity, either
Yeah,
by the performer or by the composer, of like, look how complex I can make my rhythms and my harmony. And like,
exactly.
like there's loads of that.
Yeah, and so I'm with you. I feel like maybe in response to that, or a lot of times it even I don't know why it feels this way, but in rebellion to that, and in rebellion to like, I'm gesturing everywhere, like all around us.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like I feel so compelled to move in the opposite direction. And you follow me on social media, you've probably seen me exploring new pieces that are doing exactly what you're describing as well. Like, in the last piece I finished, I go as far as to the very end of the piece. I attach the pacing of the music to like deep inhales and exhales. Like there's no tempo marking. It's just dynamic markings, crescendo, decrescendo, that follows like a breath in and a breath out. And I've been working with a pianist on like getting that right. And I'm like, does this make sense? Does this work? And she's like, I love it. It's like a great way to end the piece. But yeah, I find like I'm finding that I'm digging deeper into this kind of introspective space. Just because like it's getting like the opposite's getting worse out there.
Definitely. And
you know?
like if as if it wasn't enough with like real life stuff, we don't need I don't think we need it in music as well, It's such a heavy, stressful world to live in, so full of information. So I don't know. Yeah. That sounds beautiful. I'm looking forward to hearing that one.
Yeah, yeah, I'll definitely be sharing it,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that's why I do appreciate your music so much, and then any piece where I feel like the composer creates like a space, just like an environment to just kind of sit
Mm.
in for a minute, where it's like subtle stuff. It's not anything in your face. I just love that music. So
Yeah.
totally with you. And before I keep going, I'll move on.
Yeah, we
um,
could, yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
I guess, is it fair to say that you would describe yourself as like an introvert based on
Oh yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's interesting because again, I would describe myself as an introvert, but here we are, we're having like a pretty dynamic conversation. Like you don't seem very shy to me. So, I mean, do you find that your introspective nature, does that change the way you approach collaboration? I mean, what what does that look like?
Yeah, I guess historically I've always had a real hard time with, you know, communicating in the normal way with people. I've always been definitely very shy. I mean, I guess with the years you learn how to shake it off a bit, but it's a lot of it, it's also about who's on the other end, right? And like, do I feel at ease with whoever's on the other end, which is probably why this is very easy, right? There's loads of points in common, and like I come to a
Yeah,
very friendly space from a person that is already, like has already told me things that I find interesting or have points in common and everything, and so that's easier. And then like I don't need to, I guess it's sometimes it's easier to talk about music than to talk about yourself as well,
sure,
which
right,
is
right.
another thing. uh I've been, again, I think this country is very special that way. I've been very lucky to find collaborators that I really resonate with, not only artistically but also personally, and loads of them have become and are dear friends of mine. So I guess whenever I get into that moment of like, let's sit down and talk about music and ideas, these are people that most of the times I already feel at home with. And when it's new people, yes, there's always the starting stages. If you're approached by an ensemble or a particular person that's maybe interested in your music and how you navigate that, which is not necessarily easy. But I guess that's when you try to steer your attention to their practice. And that's often the best way to get to know them. If I'm writing for a particular performer that I'm not that familiar with personally, or it's something more, bigger, less personal, like an orchestra, or, like that sort of thing, then I guess, yeah, thinking about the creative aspect of it first and trying to connect with their music, rather than with the person necessarily on first basis, it's probably the easiest.
I know how easy it is to hear a mid roll just like this one and tune out completely. I do it too. Actually, I even skip through them sometimes. But if you've been enjoying this episode and you're still with me here, this is a great moment to hit follow, leave a quick rating, or just tell a friend. All of those actions really do matter, and you can find links in the show notes, or you can visit looseleaftransmissions.com to do all of those things and more. So for your album Sea Salt and Turpentine, I mean, what that must have been like highly collaborative if you're writing text for someone to sing
Yeah,
and working. I mean, it's the same ensemble through the whole album. I mean, what was that collaboration like?
that's really labor of love in many years. So the first link there, that I'm incredibly lucky to have, is the label. Garrett and Benedict, who are the label directors, are very, very close friends of mine. And Garrett Scholdice would have been, from the moment I arrived into Ireland, a mentor to me, really. He's been there from the get go, and I think he understands me very well creatively. And he was always sort of shepherding that particular project, and being very good at giving me all the good intentions and all the space to, make it bloom. So that was really great from the start. In a similar vein, Michelle has been a very close friend for many years, and I've admired her work forever. She's fantastic, and I think there's many points in common in the kind of sort of music that we like and we listen to, and so it was very easy to start working with her. Before the album, I wrote a couple of pieces for her as well, so I would know her as a performer at that point. She's one of those performers that really has, in a way, a composer mind. She understands
Yeah.
very well the way composers think, and she has a very analytical mind, and like we had very, very long chats about words and word setting and notation and how certain things would go, and like a whole system of how to approach it, and it was really good to have her there. And then for Ficino, I started working with them a couple years ago. They did a workshop for composers to write pieces for them. And that would have been with Michelle as well. That was a trio. It was Nathan, who is the creative director of the ensemble, and the viola player, and also harp clarinet, which also ended up in the album, right? And that particular workshop is where I started writing the There Is a Willow piece, and that sort of triggered a very dynamic relationship with the ensemble from that particular workshop and that particular piece. Then I started writing the rest of it. I talked to Nathan I told him I'm thinking about the album. And so from the beginning, I knew they were going to be the performers. And because I had that space in the workshop to kind of get to know them, know their strengths, and know how they played, what they liked, what were, their fortes, then the whole thing ended up coming up together.
I love what you're talking about, like kind of, I mean, you establish a relationship with the performer or performers, and then you kind of have this idea of like how to take that further and then approaching them about that. I mean, that could be like a really scary thing. And I actually did that like last week with
Okay.
with someone who I'm like pretty close friends with, but I'm like, maybe he doesn't want me to bother him with
Which
this, or
sometimes is even more
he,
difficult because you're like, oh, I don't want to put them on the spot that they think that they have to say yes because they're my friend or
right.
something.
And so I'm like, I'm like pouring over this like very short like message to text him, and then I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna send it and whatever. And then of course he's like, hell yeah, let's do it, let's work together. I'm so excited. And so I don't know, was that kind of like what the experience of asking Ficino was it like that?
I'm trying to think. I don't necessarily remember how it
Yeah,
happened
that's
actually.
fair.
But I see Nathan is it's a very driven person. Like he is the sort of person that always has ideas for things happening, you know? And there's always been that nature in my interactions to him that he's always open to ideas and he's always open to making things happen. And he's such a strong leader in that sense. He always has kind of ways, very clear ways of making things happen. And I think that on one side, and on the other side, I had, as I was saying from the beginning, the support from the label.
Yeah.
And so I think loads of it would have been as well Garrett and Benedict saying like, should we approach the ensemble and how do we approach it, and kind of us as a front approaching them together, that sort of thing. But the nice thing about Dublin as well is that it's such a close knit community. Like these are people that, that I would see in concerts, that I would talk to, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit, and I acknowledge based on what you've shared so far, this might be like maybe an overwhelming question
Okay.
to ask, just based on like all the myriad of interests that you have. What is a piece of music, a song, a film, book, a piece of art, any kind of artistic artifact that like kind of changed your creative world, or changed your life even?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many. It's
Yeah,
like
right.
that's one of those like, I always think in particular because that was a very 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 big one for me. There's a novel, poetic novel by Virginia Woolf called The Waves. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that have happened to me is reading that book, you know? And I think there's so much of it that, again, if I keep coming back to it, or if I think back to it, or as I grow up and, discover things about myself, they kind of make sense in that frame. About that book that shaped me so much, the way she uses language, that, the imagery, the idea of poetic language, the idea of the stream of consciousness. These are six characters that she takes from their childhood all the way to kind of middle age. And it's such a rich choral sort of writing. They're always kind of swapping from one to the other. And these are very different characters, but in the end, there's something like so fundamental about all of them that in a way it felt like each of them had something that was part of me. And I know we probably loads of us feel that way, but you know how like there's particular authors or composers or like people from arts in the past and everything that in many ways feel almost like a friend, like a very
Oh yeah.
tender friend that taught you all these important lessons. And I think that book did a lot of that for me. Yeah.
Have you wrote any music inspired by that, or
No.
no?
There's references. There's
Yeah.
references, especially in the title piece in Sea Salt and Turpentine. In the text of that piece, there's references to that book, but not direct quotations. No.
So you've described your music as a depiction of your inner landscapes. I think this kind of ties into what we were talking about before. But I just love that phrasing. I think that's from your bio, right? Do you think of each piece as like it's documenting a specific emotional moment or a memory, or is it even more abstract than that?
I think it might change depending on the piece, but it generally kind of is directed towards a specific concern or a specific moment maybe of something. And it's never, that's why, like, I think the way I'm phrasing it that way when I describe it too is because it's not necessarily emotions. Is not like, oh, I'm just going to talk about this specific emotion or how I feel. It's maybe something that feels broader,
Yeah.
um or that it has much more to it rather than a single thing. So it's often things that I feel are kind of constant in my way of thinking or my way of feeling, and kind of span through many situations or many memories or many occasions. And so it's almost like a sort of like kaleidoscopic view on something. If the concern, for example, might be, I don't know, certain type of anxiety towards time perception, for example. That's something that happened for One Piece. I just kind of had this sense of time stretching and collapsing whenever something big would happen in my life. And like, how that idea tapped into the piece, into what is memory, what is imagination towards the future, what is the actual present. And it feels like that to me is like a particular landscape that I was interested in, and kind of time perception tied up to how I'm feeling or what is happening around me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I mean, on that note, I I think a lot about how in music can you create moments that evoke like savoring the time that you're talking about? Like, how do you savor the good times? And make them last longer than they actually might be.
Yeah,
This is like really
because
gonna,
we actually
yeah,
can, which is the good thing about music. You have
yeah,
the ability to manipulate that time perception and that way of stretching or collapsing things. And
yeah.
that feels something very important in that particular moment. I had a big health scare around that time in my family, and suddenly time seems so important, and I wanted to focus on that idea. Yeah.
I think when I was writing this question, I was thinking about your piece from the album. That's like inspired by like an experience you had going to a poetry reading.
Oh, the it was only half as far. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So that one, yeah, that's interesting because like I had, and I think like the album is all, yeah, tapping into these different moments, and I know I needed something just in terms of the architecture of it. I needed something that was brighter in the middle. I needed this space of like light in a way. And so I was constantly, and again, that constant kind of search for what's this piece about and what am I unearthing here. And I knew what I wanted to do with it is kind of, in a way, depict those moments of, elation, those moments of happiness when you kind of, and it's not just happiness, it's just that sense of almost suspension when you're in a place in which you're kind of almost watching things from above,
Yeah.
and it feels right and it feels nice. And back into kind of the literary vein of it, there's this beautiful poem by Lawrence Ferlinghetti which starts with those lines: it was only half as far, or heaven was only half as far that night in the poetry reading session, whatever, whatever. And the poem is so beautiful, and it's all about that particular feeling of, even in the most mundane of situations, just feeling that sense of suspension, of things making sense, of things feeling right, of you feeling kind of higher sense of understanding of what's happening in life. And so, for example, for that particular one, it's not that I'm kind of going to a particular memory that would give me that, but more to a collective of it, like a
Yeah.
collective of moments, a collective of memories, of spaces or people that would take me into that particular moment. And so that's when it comes together as that, as I describe it, that particular landscape or inner landscape of that suspension.
I have to acknowledge that, this podcast, my intention is not to like promote specific work, but so much of your album, I mean, it seems to capture like so much about you that I appreciate. And so for anyone listening that's like, oh, you're spending a lot of time talking about this album. Well, that's why. And,
Yeah.
if you're listening to this years from now, for sure, check it out. But yeah, I don't know. That's like kind of, it's interesting to me because I feel like not a lot of composers, but there's a lot of albums out there that don't have that kind of cohesiveness and artistic identity. And now that we're kind of nearing the end of this conversation, it's kind of like all coalescing in my mind now that your album is like a perfect mirror for who you are. I mean, was that
Thank you.
intentional from the beginning?
Yeah, I think that was the as we were talking, kind of journey and process. I think the main thing for me is to give, and this is a project that I kind of did for myself and to myself. And so from the beginning, I knew I was going to take whatever time I needed to make it right, and whatever time I needed to make it feel like it was myself. Like in
Yeah.
a way, my big statement as a composer right here, right now, and not something that's tied up to any other projects in specific. It's just a thing that exists on its own, and that I yeah, I made mine. I wanted to make 100% mine in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to make sure that we have time to talk about another kind of hat that you wear, and that's as a producer. So, alongside composing, you're deeply involved in curating and producing through the international collective Sonic Gate Studios and the Ergodos record label that you had mentioned. So I'd love to hear more about these roles. I mean, what draws you to them, and how do they feed your creative life?
It's so interesting actually, because that's one of the places I draw the most from musically, I guess. Like when here in Dublin, I've done loads of work as kind of session producer, recording things for orchestras, ensembles, done a good bit of work with the Irish National Opera and that sort of thing. And like, this is music that's not my music, but it's my job to learn the music, to understand it very well, to be able to get the best recording out of it. And so you end up just like exposed to a crazy amount of amazing good music from all times. It's not necessarily contemporary. If anything, like, there's loads of it that's not contemporary. And just like score studying and listening to these pieces and really, really, really understanding them. And so you can only imagine how valuable that is for a composer.
Oh yeah,
You just get the time to like spend a few days with Puccini or Wagner, or with like, it could be anything. And so not only does it open my mind creatively so much, but also I get to meet again so many interesting musicians. And like, I guess by the time I'm writing for that ensemble or that orchestra or that particular performer, these are people that are already people in my life, if that makes sense, that I already know how they play, but also like I've had conversations with. So it's such an enriching exercise from kind of music producer point of view, and I really value it. And I really value as well the space of like getting out of my head a little bit and putting my attention into someone else's music, which I think it's interesting, right? How sometimes when you're composing, it can all get a bit too much or too overwhelming. And then, like, just to have that space of being like, listen, this other thing, it's also very important, um, helps a lot. And then with Sonic Gate is started as really as a kind of friends project. like when all of us graduated from the masters. And as I was telling you, we all come from different places in the world, and we knew that inevitably we would be kind of parting our ways at some point. And so the primary idea was that it would also help us, to stay in touch, to be doing music together.
Yeah.
And we've had a couple of nice projects with that group, and it's always nice to just come back to that particular group of people and sit down, talk ideas, make things happen. It's probably not doing as much as I think all of us wish it could, because there's always time and other commitments, but it's definitely a space for music making with friends, which is really great.
When you guys are like active, what sort of projects do you tend to do?
It's usually album recordings of, we tend to kind of put some sort of like thematic umbrella of something we want to explore, and then work with a particular ensemble. The one we're working at the minute, that's kind of in the pipeline, it's we're working with a group here of the Dublin Viols, they're called. It's a concert of viola da gamba
Oh, that's awesome.
and a singer, Michelle, actually.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that like each of us would write a piece for that ensemble with that singer, and the thematic was landscapes, actual landscapes that have faded through the years since we were little because of climate change or anything. So if there was anything, any particular space that you would have seen as a child, maybe a big beautiful forest that now 20 years down the line is gone, or that sort of thing, and how let's say the topography has changed through the years because of climate change. uh, and so that's the kind of the thread for all the pieces. So be stuff like that, and then we just kind of sit down, write the music, and then get it recorded, chat a bit, that sort of thing.
Nice. Yeah. So you all met in Dublin, but
Yes.
are you all still in Dublin, or have people spread back
No,
out?
people spread back out. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
There's only three of us here still.
Yeah.
3 out of 10. Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, I guess this has me thinking. Like you grew up in Colombia, you found yourself in Ireland. You said that your background is Italian as well. I mean, do you feel like a global composer in that sense? I mean, do you feel like you're active globally?
That's been one of the kind of big questions of my life. It's the idea of identity and cultural identity, and it's something that's been so present since the very beginning. Um, it's interesting to see how it seems to be somehow something we carry in the blood, if you want to think about it that way, because everyone in my family, we're all the same. Like my grandfather was a sailor, and he kind of went across the globe in his ship, all over the place, and he himself would have had, his mom was Greek, but dad was Italian, but he was born in Turkey, and he was moving around. And so there's this idea of the itinerance, or the moving parts. And my siblings are the same. They're not musicians. They're both sailors. Sailors. They're not sailors. They're lawyers. And but they're in a very similar space. Like my sister's in France. My brother has been through California, and like we're all moving all the time. And so I've always had that idea of, where do I belong? How do I belong? And it's interesting because from a very early age, I always had a sense of not belonging in where I grew up, even if I had, and I still have, a very beautiful family that I'm very close to. But it was just the surroundings didn't feel right. And how I started kind of looking for myself out there, and what resonated with me. And I think it's fair to say as well, in the type of world that we live in today, in which this sort of situation wouldn't necessarily be rare. Like there's so many people that come from bicultural backgrounds, or move around. And in the end, I don't know, I think like the conclusion I made is that, a little bit like with music, you kind of, you're drawn to what resonates with you,
Mm.
whether that is the place you grew up in or somewhere really far away. And I guess that sense of cultural belonging that felt that maybe the world was making me feel was something I needed is gone, and I don't necessarily feel the urgency or the need to look for it anymore. It's more, what from my past and my ancestry do I like, and what do I take from it? And is not necessarily all of it, but I pick and choose, I pick and choose what I really love from the places I come from.
It's beautifully put. So, getting into my final set of questions here. Again, these are questions that I ask everybody, starting with what do you think you would be doing artistically or otherwise if it wasn't composing? Like if you had some other line of work that you were doing?
Yeah, that's an easy one. I'd be a writer.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Do
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I would have been a writer. Yeah, definitely.
you think you'd be writing like fiction, nonfiction,
I always
poetry?
I always thought it would have been fiction, but with what I do today and the way I deal with text now, maybe poetry would have been more suited.
What are you trying to get better at in your creative life right now?
One of the things I'm always striving for is discipline, in the sense of like not losing the time to sit down and compose whenever I can. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm at the piano or at the desk all the time. Like there's many ways in which that process happens, and it's informed by many other things. I could be like outside taking a walk and thinking, or reading something interesting, or listening to something interesting. But to always have that structure and that discipline, I think about it sometimes like, because it's a very different exercise, but you know how performers have a very rooted sense of discipline whenever they work their practice, and for us composers it's maybe a little bit more disperse because of the nature of it. Like you cannot be all the time on and all the time kind of doing 5 hours or like 8 hours or whatever it is that you need. But I always think it's important to keep it ticking, even if I don't have particular things going on, even if I don't have like a particular deadline, but to keep it ticking. Also because I always feel whenever I spend a little bit too much time without composing, I start feeling awful. I just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
stop enjoying life somehow. So that's something I'm always kind of trying to channel very, very intently. Yeah.
I have two thoughts. One is I'm also trying to get better at what you're describing, and I've been really bad about giving myself the grace and time to compose in recent years. I'm just now coming back to it where I'm like, this is important. And you're right. I don't have to like sit down and pen to paper, like be writing. Like that doesn't necessarily have to be what it looks like. It can be, cleaning up a score, revising something, even. It could be, you know, trying to like update my website or just, percolating in the background, on whatever. But the last point you made about like feeling awful if you go a while without composing, there was a composer in my orbit in undergrad who was someone I didn't study with, and he wasn't like a composition faculty. He was just someone on staff who happened to compose, and it was very separate from the university. And I remember him saying one time to me that he would get into like the worst, most irritable moods when he didn't compose. And I don't know, like if I'm sure that when you say you feel awful, you don't mean like quite like that. But I kind of like I feel what he's talking about sometimes.
Oh,
Like,
definitely.
like
It
I'm
it
like I'm
feels,
extra, yeah, I'm extra cranky because
yeah, and there's a sense of maybe emptiness or something, or
yeah.
like things stop making sense, and why am I feeling terrible? Why am I like, and it's usually that. Yeah.
Is there a tool that you use in your practice that you think everyone should know about and that everyone else could benefit from? It could be like a physical object, it could be a process, it could be a software, any kind of like tool.
Yeah.
Um,
Um
yeah.
I I find, and this is, it's interesting because I kind of I've seen it in other people. Manual things are very good to disperse the mind. I think we spend so much time kind of on screens, with screens, looking at the phone, and like there's so much going on in that kind of visual realm, and the way the screens are feeding things to us, that I always find that doing something, in my case I really like drawing or painting or that sort of thing, and even things that are not like that. Because what's interesting about it is that I'm not putting effort in it being something great or beautiful or whatever. It's more in the exercise and the special type of concentration that it requires to do something that sometimes is even just patterns, or sometimes it's just like a little sketch of
Mm,
something, or that sort of thing, something that feels tactile. Cooking, for example, would be another very nice thing to do that kind of helps me kind of bring in ideas, and suddenly I start feeling things knocking in my brain the moment I give myself those spaces. Or just going for a really long walk, but without listening to music and without just kind of spaces in which you can be with your thoughts. And often that thing of being busy with something manual opens up that brainwave, if that makes sense.
it does make sense, and I feel exactly what you mean.
Mhm.
So my final question is, what is something that you've never had a chance to say about your art that you've always wanted to share with people?
Well, I guess something that I think it's it's interesting, and maybe back to that idea of certain types of expectation and how contemporary music works, or in general how kind of creative work in the modern world is, and all the things attached to it. What I think it's often interesting is that I think modern times somehow caught up or kind of cancel that idea of art as it was perceived before. Like I'm trying to kind of come up with this
Sure.
as I speak,
Yeah.
but you know how like back in the day you would have heard like any of them big minds talking about their work and about their creative process with so much certainty. I'm an artist, I'm a composer, I'm a writer. And I think nowadays there's a lot maybe of fear towards that idea of seeing art as something that is so important, or cataloging yourself as an artist. It feels dirty, or it feels like maybe you're being a little bit too full of yourself, or that sort of thing. But I think that's been something that's been important to me from a very early age, and the way I perceive myself and the way I consider myself. And I think that's something that maybe people don't talk too much about, because there's maybe certain skepticism around it. The idea of being an artist, of considering yourself an artist in the kind of full length of the word, and what it brings with it. Certain sensitivities and certain ways of living life and perceiving your surroundings that are perhaps different to other people. And so, yeah, I think we should all embrace more that.
Oh, yeah, and I love what you just said about like almost like having like an artistic ethos of going through the world. I mean,
Yeah,
that's something I've been like really trying to that's something I've been trying to get better at lately, is recognizing that and allowing myself permission that
that's it.
like any little thing that I do can be an act of artistry, because that's who I am. That's who you are. That's who, plug in whoever, that's who
Yeah.
they are, and um yeah, I love that. Katerina, this has been so awesome, and
Thank you.
just
It's been
think
great. Yeah. Sorry
yeah.
about the.
No, 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 no. That's what I'm after. And I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you talking, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk more
Yeah.
again
If you're
someday
ever
soon.
back in Dublin, please to send an email. It'd be
I will let you
great.
know. Yeah. Well, thanks so much.
Tyler, huge thanks, and huge thanks for the also for all the playing the music and everything. It's yeah, so important.
That's that's what I'm here for. It's always such a joy to be able to sit down with composers, just people for the first time, like I just did with Katerina. and have this instant connection. Such a fun conversation, and I really appreciate everything that she shared, both about her music and her life. You can learn more about Caterina and her work on her website. That's CaterinaSchembri.com, and I'll be sure to include a link to that in the show notes. I'm Tyler Kline. Thank you, as always, for joining me for this episode of Music Maker. The show is produced by Loose Leaf Transmissions, made for all ears. You can explore more episodes and find ways to support the work at looseleaftransmissions.com. Thank you so much again for listening, and I will see you back here again next time.